The rain was falling in heavy sheets, drenching the city streets in a blur of gray. Cars honked impatiently as they splashed through the puddles, their headlights cutting through the downpour like fleeting beams of hope. In the middle of it all, under the flickering neon sign of a 24-hour diner, stood a woman, wet, weary, and seemingly lost. She was staring at the empty street, the rain streaming down her face like tears, though she was no longer sure if they were from the storm or from the deep sadness that had haunted her for days. She had no umbrella, no jacket to shield her from the storm, just a heavy bag slung over her shoulder and a look of quiet desperation in her eyes. It had been a long day. In fact, it had been a long week. And now, standing there in the pouring rain, she had no idea how she was going to get home. The bus was nowhere to be seen, and taxis were scarce in this part of town. It seemed like her only option was to wait, hoping for a miracle. That miracle came in the form of a car pulling up beside her. The window rolled down, and a voice called out. "Hey, do you need a ride?" She hesitated. Who was this person, offering help without hesitation? But the rain had soaked her through, and the warmth inside the car seemed like an answer to a prayer. With a faint nod, she climbed into the car, unaware that the ride would change her life, and his, forever. The driver's name was Jack, a man in his mid-30s with an easy smile and a warm, open demeanor. He'd always been the type of person who believed in helping others. Maybe it was his upbringing, or maybe it was his nature, but Jack had always felt a pull toward kindness, a pull that kept him reaching out to others even when he had his own struggles. His life, though comfortable, hadn't been without his challenges. He was a middle-class guy who worked long hours as a project manager for a construction company. He had a steady job, a decent car, and a small but cozy apartment. To the outside world, he seemed like everything was going fine. But deep down, Jack was dealing with a quiet battle of his own. He had been struggling with the recent loss of his father, who had passed away a few months ago. The grief still weighed heavily on him, a constant ache that lingered in his chest. It had been hard to adjust to life without his dad, and Jack had found himself withdrawing more and more, spending his free time either at work or alone in his apartment. His friends had tried to reach out, but Jack had kept his distance. He told himself he just needed time to process, time to heal. But in reality, he was avoiding the deep pain, afraid that if he allowed himself to feel it fully, he might never be able to get up again. Helping others, however, had always been a way for Jack to feel connected. He knew that if he could make a difference in someone else's life, even in a small way, it might help him find his way back to himself. And so, when he saw the woman standing in the rain, looking lost and vulnerable, something inside him stirred. Without a second thought, he pulled over and offered her a ride. The woman's name was Emily, and her life had been anything but easy. She had grown up in a small town, raised by a single mother who had struggled to make ends meet. Her father had left when she was just a baby, and her mother had worked tirelessly to give Emily a better life, sacrificing her own dreams for the sake of her daughter's future. Emily had always been a bright student, eager to learn, eager to make her mother proud. But life had a way of throwing curveballs. After high school, Emily had gone to college on a scholarship, determined to become a lawyer. She had dreams of fighting for justice, of helping the voiceless, and of making a difference in the world. But somewhere along the way, things had unraveled. The pressure of school, the weight of student loans, and the loneliness of being far from home had begun to take its toll. She had dropped out after 2 years, unable to keep up with the demands of her studies and the emotional burden she carried. She moved to the city, hoping for a fresh start, but the weight of her past continued to follow her. For the past year, Emily had worked as a waitress in a diner, barely scraping by. She had been living in a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper, struggling to make rent every month. The idea of returning home, of admitting to her mother that she had failed, felt unbearable. She had buried herself in work, in late-night shifts, trying to escape the constant ache of unfulfilled dreams. But tonight, something inside her had finally cracked. The loneliness, the exhaustion, and the fear of never living up to her potential had overwhelmed her. She had just left her shift at the diner and was walking aimlessly through the streets, unsure of where she was going or what to do next. That rain had only made things worse, soaking through her thin jacket and making her feel even more invisible in a city that never seemed to. There was another pause before Emily spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost as if she was talking to herself. I just don't know what to do anymore, she said, her words heavy with despair. I've spent my whole life trying to make something of myself, but I feel like I've failed. Like nothing I do ever really matters. Like Jack's heart sank. He had heard these words before from friends and family who had battled similar feelings. He knew how easy it was to get lost in the idea that your worth was tied to what you achieved, to the expectations others placed on you. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would make her feel seen, but words often felt so inadequate in moments like this. But then Emily surprised him. I don't want to be a disappointment, she whispered almost to herself. I don't want to let my mother down again. Jack glanced over at her, his heart aching for her. Your mother? He asked, curious but careful not to intrude. Emily paused, gathering her thoughts, then looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. She worked so hard for me, she said. She gave up everything just to make sure I could have a chance at a better life. But I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to live up to that. To be the person she believes I am. It was in that moment, as she shared her vulnerability, that Jack understood. He understood the weight of her story, the pressure of expectations, the fear of failing the ones we love the most. And he realized that her secret wasn't something she had done. It was something she felt, the fear of being seen as a disappointment, of never living up to the promises she had made to herself and to her mother. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Emily's words settle in his chest. He didn't know how to fix everything for her, but he knew one thing for certain. No one was ever truly alone in their struggles, no matter how isolated they felt. You know, he said softly, breaking the silence, we all go through things that seem impossible to handle. But it's not about never failing. It's about how we rise after falling. You're not alone in this, Emily. She looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. You don't know me, though, she said, her voice trembling. I don't have to know you to know that you're not a disappointment, Jack replied. And neither are any of us. They both fell quiet again, the car gliding through the rain as the city blurred around them. In that moment, there was a sense of understanding between them. Two people, both struggling with their own stories, finding comfort in the simple act of being heard. When they finally reached Emily's apartment, she thanked him, her voice a little softer than before. She stepped out of the car, looking back at him one last time. You've been kind, she said. Thank you. Jack smiled, his heart warmed by the brief connection they had shared. Take care of yourself, Emily, and remember, it's never too late to find your way. Months passed, but that night stayed with Jack. He didn't know what happened to Emily, but he hoped she had found the peace she was searching for. In his own life, Jack had begun to open up more, allowing himself to grieve the loss of his father, but also to appreciate the quiet moments of connection that made life worth living. Emily, too, began to find her footing. She had gone back to school part-time, determined to finish what she had started, even if it took longer than she had planned. She reconnected with her mother, sharing her fears and doubts, and found that the love and understanding she had longed for were there all along. Both of them had discovered something that night. That kindness, even from a stranger, had the power to change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Echo Tales for more powerful, emotional stories. We all have our own journeys, our struggles, and our moments of vulnerability, but through kindness and connection, we can find the strength to keep moving forward. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, and remember, you're never alone in your struggles. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that inspire hope, resilience, and the power of human connection.